Evening. I'm Ramanda. Thank you for joining us this evening. What this evening is about is 25 years ago, attending the Silmar, I had, for me, an incredible experience that I took notes of, and over the years I've attempted to revive the notes, make a book of it, and I was so close to the material that I would start crying every time I would start to review the material, the notes and tapes that I had taken. This was back in 1985, if I remember correctly. I found I had some help about 5 years ago and put together a little book about the experience. Right now I'm having that book rewritten, and that should be on the internet for people to read for free within just a couple of weeks. But I'd like to share with you, this is my first ever public presentation of the book. I told Nick a little bit about it. I told one other person most of the story. So really, for all practical purposes, you're the first ones to hear of the experience that I had 25 years ago. And I'm delighted and humbled, if you will, to share it with you. It was a very emotional time for me as I went through the various demonstrations that I'll share with you. It touched something within me that would bring about tears all the time. I'll back up and start that I checked in at a Silmar. And you all, I assume, know what I'm talking about when I say a Silmar.
Yes.
It's the state-run convention center in Pacific Grove, California. I checked in, and my motel room was off campus per se. I was a couple of miles away. And I went back to my room, or checked in at my room, and did a treatment. And the treatment was so profound for me that I cried and had to restart the treatment, if you will, several times. I was standing in front of the dresser drawers, and the mirror above it, I was looking at myself in the mirror and started to do the treatment. And as I did, my eyes swelled up and I burst into tears. And this continued all the way through the treatment. The next day started this amazing experience for me, and I'll share all the details that I remember with you. First was when I was getting dressed in the morning. I had some relatively new boots that I was wearing, eelskin boots that hurt my feet every time I would wear them. I had taken them back and had them stretched twice, and my feet would still ache when I would be wearing them after about 20 minutes, and then for hours after I took the boots off. Well, I did a treatment that morning that the boots fit perfectly, they were comfortable, and I went on with my day, if you will. Well, that was the first of many experiences I had that week. It may sound kind of trite, if you will, but I mean, my feet would really hurt when I was wearing these boots. And I wore them for years after this particular day, and I never had any discomfort again of any kind wearing the boots or immediately after I took the boots off. I have an aunt who was a staff minister of religious science at a San Diego church, and she had asked me to take notes when I told her I was going to be attending a Silmar. And my teacher that had at that point taught me Science of Mind 1 and 2, when I told her that I was going to a Silmar, she asked me to please take time to smell the flowers. And with those two things in mind, I began the week, and as I looked over the itinerary of everything going on, I realized that perhaps it would be best served for me to take time to smell the flowers if I didn't plan on being at a particular function or lecture or workshop, that I would wander the grounds and show up where I needed to be, if you will, based at that moment in time. So I spent most of the week mostly looking at the ground in front of me, wandering around the Pacific Grove Asilomar grounds. If you were to have looked at me at that time, you may have thought that I was inebriated, because I would take a step to the right and then the next step might be to the left. I wasn't trying to go anywhere. I wasn't attempting to go from point A to point B. I was just looking at the ground and wandering around. The week started off slowly, if you will. I didn't realize what I was caught up into until after I left the Asilomar and sometime afterwards. I found that when I would show up around people, they would start talking about what I was just thinking. If I was thinking about a particular song and got near the administration building, someone would turn their whatever on and I would hear that song. The synchronicity was just amazing. I think it was the second day I was in line at lunchtime. They ring a bell and everyone gets in line in front of Crocker Hall, the main dining room, which I suspect seats 600-700 people. Well, I found myself in line and I realized that I hadn't brought my lunch ticket with me. And I no sooner thought that I hadn't brought my lunch ticket with me, the lady in front of me turns around and says, "Oh my, I've got 2 lunch tickets today. I told them in the office I lost mine and they gave me a replacement. Now I have 2. Well, I told her that I didn't have my ticket, and of course I now had 1. Without saying a word to this lady. All I did was think that I hadn't brought my ticket with me. Those kind of experiences continued all week long. Excuse the pause as I go back in time and try to keep the timeline for all of you on how these experiences occurred. I remember one session as I was walking up towards Merrill Hall. From a distance I could hear the speaker kind of speaking, and as I approached the entrance to Merrill Hall, which is the main speaking venue, it holds about 800 people. As I got within perhaps 15 feet of the front door, and the doors were open so you could hear the amplified lecture, a moment before the speaker spoke, about 2 sentences as I listened, I knew exactly what the speaker was going to say. I knew what the next word was before he said that word. And I kind of flippantly said, "Oh well, I know all this, I don't need to go in there." And I proceeded to walk around the Merrill Hall, the main speaking venue, and just looking at the trees and the shrubs and the grass and whatnot. I went around the building, and again I was looking down at the ground, and I approached a pine tree, and I could see from my peripheral vision as I looked down that there was a pine branch just in front of me, and I ducked a little bit and touched it, and raised it up to pass under the pine branch. And the moment I touched it, I started crying. And not just little, I mean, I was bellowing, I was loud, and tears coming down, and I still had the inertia of walking slowly. And I passed under the branch and let go of it, and I immediately stopped crying. And I go, whoa, what was that? And I turn around and I grab the branch to try to recreate what just happened. And nothing happened. And I did it again and again to try to make sense of what just happened and recreate it, and nothing happened. So I continued my walk, and I plopped down on some pine needles on the opposite side of the Merrill Hall from where I was first going to enter, and I could hear the speaker speaking again through the open doors, and I was still concentrating on what had just happened rather than listening to the speaker. I couldn't get my attention. Besides, I knew all that. So after a while, I got up and I continued walking. And at this point, I was aware that the fog was coming in. Now, the Asilomar grounds are at the edge of the ocean there in Pacific Grove. And in a moment, the temperature changes, the wind changes, and you can have this fog rolling in. It's not at all uncommon. Well, the fog was quite dense at this point as I continued walking. It was like a mist was coming down. It wasn't rain, it was just the heaviness of the fog. And I went past the dining room and sat down under a tree, kind of a sparse kind of tree, and contemplated what had just happened, touching the tree and crying, attempting to make some sense of it. And after a bit, I realized that I wasn't cold. I'm watching this fog rolling in, and at times there would be a mist kind of coming down, not quite a rain yet. And I wasn't wet, I wasn't cold. I reached under me and touched my rear end, and I was warm, and I touched the ground under me, and it was like being on a heating pad. And I'm going, what's going on here? And then I'm looking, and I'm watching the tall grass. I was on a little bit of an embankment, so it's not an area that you would cut the grass, and the grass was quite long, and with this heavy dew coming in, the grass was bent over all around me, between my legs, either side of me, bent over and dripping the dew. And I wasn't wet, I wasn't cold, and I'm watching this in amazement. And then I would think back to the tree, trying to make sense of this, and couldn't. And as I gazed out at the fog coming in, my back was to the ocean. There's a dunes, sand dunes behind me. The people who have been to Asilomar, I was in front of the area called the Meadow. The dining hall was over to my right as I was seated there, the chapel to my left, and the administration building across the meadow. And I'm watching this fog rolling in and the moisture kind of coming down, and all of a sudden I see fog going that way. Well, I feel the wind on the back of my neck, the gentle breeze, the breeze is going this way, and I'm going, well, what's this? And I look again, and I see the fog coming in, and I relax my eyes, and I see fog going that way. And I go, well, that's no more bizarre than all these other things that I've been experiencing. And it really wasn't until about 5 years ago that I realized what I was seeing was part of my aura, but I didn't know it at the time. when I relaxed my eyes and I was looking at the fog going this way, and what I was seeing was part of my aura in movement going the opposite direction, but I didn't know it at the time. So I sat there a while alone. Everybody else was in Merrill Hall listening to what I thought I already knew. So I decided to get up and just wander around again. And the fog was still quite thick, and I walked in the direction of the chapel. And as I got to near the main entrance to the chapel, a man comes out, and I see him through the fog approach me, and he says, wanted to sit on, without trying to get to it. And it had several vines of poison oak over it. And as I was reaching over to move the poison oak, I thought that it was just a plant that preferred to be left alone, and just moved it over and sat down there and basked in the sunlight that I was able to get there without trying to this time. And I sat there a while and then went on my way. And I never did get any itchies, no poison oak at all. And it was a reminder for me about being in that flow and not trying to orchestrate something, and not trying to get from point A to point B, but to remain in that flow of things. I was sitting outside Merrill, or the administration building one day, and there was a lady playing her guitar and singing. And for me it was something quite extraordinary, in that after 20-30 minutes of her playing, she looked up at me and said how easy it was for her to play for me, and how she just thoroughly enjoyed playing just for me. And I've known musicians, and no one's ever said anything like that to me before, and I was humbled and honored. And people had come and gone, and I just stayed there, and she just was smiling and beaming and playing for me. And after a bit, I got up and left and walked down the steps behind the administration building and said hello to someone, and another lady comes up to me and she says, "There's a glow around your face, like a light around you." And I didn't know what to say, and I kind of intentionally lost eye contact with her because I was kind of taken aback by her saying this, and I realized the sunlight was shining everywhere, and I told her that the light was all around us. And I went on my way, and I had tears coming down. I was very much aware of that I was in a flow of something. And I didn't know, of course, what it was. When I would sit at a dining table, again, people would start, if I was thinking about a specific thing, they would start talking about it. And the whole week continued like that. Near the end of the week, I think it was a Friday, I may be missing a couple of things, and I'll come back to them. The Asilomar session that week didn't have any activities going on at night for people to socialize, to communicate their feelings, to express their feelings. There wasn't any dancing or things going on. And so that Friday night I decided I would go into Monterey after the activities had ended. And I went to a bar that I had been to many times, because at the time I lived in Salinas, which is a 35-minute drive from downtown Monterey. The bar was called the Brass Rail. It was in the top of the motel there. It was at that time called the Doubletree Inn. And I was just there a few minutes, and they started playing a song that I really liked. The band started playing a song. And I asked the lady to dance, and she said yes, and we went out there, and we were a couple seconds into the dance, and someone's bumping us. Someone else is bumping us. Someone else is bumping us. And I felt like a pinball in a machine, just going back and forth. And I've never experienced that before. And I was watching what I was doing. I'm leading the lady, and people are just bumping into me. And after I don't know how many times this has happened, 30 times, the lady says to me, "All this happens to me all the time when I'm dancing." Well, I realize now, I know why people are bumping in, even though I'm leading and trying not to. It's the expectation of the lady I'm dancing with. So at the conclusion of the dance, I walked her back to her table and thanked her. And they played another song with the same kind of beat that I just can't sit still. It was like a beat of, there's a song called Sailing. You can kind of dance slow or fast too, kind of in between. You can dance alone, and I love that kind of beat. And they played another one that was similar. So I asked another lady to dance, and we got out there, and I'm holding her, and I closed my eyes. Now, before I closed my eyes, I looked around, and we had about the same amount of people that there were in the previous song on the dance floor. It was crowded, but not overcrowded. And I closed my eyes, danced the whole song, twirled her around several times. I twirled myself as well, all the time with my eyes closed, never bumped into one person. It was awesome, and it reaffirmed what I had thought earlier when that lady had said that it happens all the time to her with people bumping into her. So anyway, I thanked that lady after the dance, and I was, of course, like I am right now, smiling from ear to ear, because I knew that I was in that flow, and to be bumped into all those times, that never happens to me. I went back and sat down, and someone that I work with showed up at the bar. This individual was quite a colorful person, if you will, and very opinionated about our mutual supervisor. He had quite a number of things to say about him. His voice got louder and louder, and as his anxiety level went up, going on and on about our mutual supervisor. And he was quite colorful, and I was a bit concerned that people around would hear his vocabulary as he expressed his opinion of our supervisor. So to myself, I said to him over and over again, "I love you. I 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 love you." And as I did that to myself, his voice calmed down. He started almost whispering, if you will, like two people right next to each other would carry on a normal conversation. The colorful language ended, and we had a normal conversation. I had seen this person many times over the next 3 or 4 years while I was employed with that organization. And although he still had some opinions about our mutual supervisor, he never again used the colorful language with me or raised his voice ever again. And even after I left the corporation, I would see him occasionally over the years. He always conducted himself like a totally different person than prior to that evening. And I, of course, never shared any of this with him. I left that bar and went outside, and you could hear the loud music from a place across the street Again, I had lived in Salinas. I had been to downtown Monterey many times, and this was a place that I would avoid. It was heavy metal entertainment, and that was never my cup of tea, if you will, and never, ever, ever would even think about going to a place that was playing heavy metal. Well, it attracted me this evening, and I went up the stairs, and there were two guys in front of me as we were going up the stairs, and they go to the booth to pay their cover charge, and they paid and started walking down a hallway. I looked at the lady behind the, I remember right, it was a glass kind of front, and she was in the booth there, and I said, "Hello, evening," and she smiled and said, "Evening back to me," or "Good evening back to me." Didn't ask me for the cover charge. So I continued walking. The two guys that were in front of me were just getting their wrists stamped and showing the bouncer, I guess you would call it, the person at the front door, that they had paid, showing them receipts. Well, I was never one to get a stamp on my wrist. Frequently, if they wouldn't avoid stamping me, I would leave a place because I didn't like to be stamped. Well, I go in and smile at the bouncer, said good evening to him, or something to that effect. He smiles and says hello to me, or vice versa. Didn't ask me for my ticket, didn't try to stamp me, and I just walked in. The place was crowded, and I went through the dance floor, and there was a place that was elevated, maybe 4 steps up, like a little plateau of tables that gave you a more commanding view of the dance floor and the rest of the bar. And there's a table right there. And this place is crowded, and the table's empty. So I sat down, and I can see the band over here, and the band's looking at me. And I smiled and waved, and they're playing heavy metal, which it was unheard of that I would do heavy metal. And I was comfortable, I was happy. There was some people at a table just next to me, a little bit behind me, like right here, and they were smoking clove cigarettes. Back in the days when you could smoke in bars and restaurants and things. And in the past, I really had a thing about clove cigarettes. I disliked them. And I would go out of my way to avoid people smoking clove cigarettes. Might have even judged them a bit in the past for smoking them, but I really didn't care for it. Well, I just smiled and said hello to the people there, and realized if I breathe through my mouth, there's no offense, I can't smell it. And I was enjoying myself. I had ordered a beer, and the beer was in front of me on the table. And after a song or two, again, the place was pretty crowded, someone came by and bumped my table. It's a round table, and the beer was there. And it was like slow motion for me. I could see the table on an angle, the beer going this way, the ashtray that was there going this way, and the guy that I might have judged at the table next to me that was smoking the clove cigarettes jumped up and grabbed the beer and the ashtray before it dumped in my lap. And for me it was like slow motion. I could see the table, I could see it sliding. I didn't do anything to try to grab it, and he jumped up and got it before it would have dumped on me. After that I left, and I went back to the motel room. I'm going back a bit now. As I said, that was the end of the week. That was on a Friday night. Somewhere around midweek, I was sitting in Merrill Hall, near the back of the room, listening to the speaker speak and enjoying it, if you will. And I had this urge to leave. And the feeling, when I say an urge, it was kind of like when I was walking without trying to go from point A to point B, but thought I would just go this way. I was just in the flow of that. Well, I was sitting there and something saying for me to get up and leave. And I've learned now, after several days of this, that I want to follow that. So I got up, and being that I lived in my motel room was off campus, and that I wasn't trying to get anywhere per se, when I arrived that evening, the lecture was already going on, and I couldn't find any parking close by. So I was like the equivalent of 2 blocks away. I was all the way outside the front entrance gate and a block down that street. Well, I didn't know where I was supposed to go or do, so I thought, well, I guess I'll walk to my car. So again, I'm walking slowly, but going in the direction of the car, wondering what's going on. When I got near the administration building, I find a very senior gentleman laying up against the embankment with his legs collapsed under him. And I immediately realized why I left Merrill Hall, why I had this urging to leave, and I rushed over to him and kind of cradled him and picked him up a bit so he could get his legs under him, but he was still leaning against the embankment. And he was very frail, maybe 90 pounds, if that. Very senior gentleman. And his eyes kind of swelled up as he was thanking me, and he said that he was supposed to ask for help, but he was embarrassed to ask people for help, so he left the administration, or left the Merrill Hall before the conclusion of the lecture so he could get to his motel room without inconveniencing anyone. Well, I obviously knew why I had this urging to leave, and I told him to stay there, and I hurried on ahead and got my car and came back, picked him up and took him to his room and got him inside. Well, coming back, instead of going to my parking place, I came back in the back entrance, and there's a parking place. And it was, if you're going to park legally, it was the closest parking place to Merrill Hall. That space was empty, and I pulled right in there and went back into the hall. It's either that evening or another evening. I have to check my notes. After the last lecture of the evening, everyone's departing Merrill Hall. A good portion of the people are heading over to the administration building because they would have coffee or hot chocolate in those days. That was free for everybody. So that was kind of like a congregating place. Most people are heading in that direction. And there were some other various things going on after hours meetings, like an AA meeting or a particular group, maybe practitioner group meeting or something. But it was at the conclusion of the evening. It's maybe 10 o'clock at night. I'm leaving the building with everyone else, and in my mind I hear this. It's not a word, but a sense of invite or come here. And it was in plural. And I'm not hearing this. I'm feeling it in my mind that I immediately respond, I'm coming. Like if I were to say, Nick, and you would respond, I'm coming. That's how I responded. I'm coming. But didn't know who I just said that to. I said it out loud. And I'm walking, there's people going by, I'm passing people, and after a few moments of continuing walking in the same direction, I hear this again, but with more urgency. So I holler out again, I'm coming, and I start running, and I get tears coming down. Now again, I didn't hear this with my ears. I have no idea what's going on, and I'm running, and I stop as I get near the dining hall, because I don't know where I'm going, and it's dark, and I'm looking around, and I knew that I just said I'm coming, but I don't know where I'm going. And so I wandered out into the meadow, this area that's in between the dining hall, the chapel, and the administration building. And then I'm walking around in there, and I find a spot that's real soft under my feet. And I just plopped down on my knees and started crying. And it was like a connection with Source, if you will. I don't know if that makes sense. In the book I wrote that I was in communion with Source. I experienced several moments of being where it was completely black. Couldn't see anything, so my eyes closed, crying. And I'm apologizing for all the things in my life I didn't complete. Not one by one, but the feeling is of all these things in my life that I started and didn't complete, and I'm apologizing like I'm talking to adult, if you will, but I don't see anyone. It's just a feeling, and I've got these tears coming down. And it wasn't apologizing for doing something wrong. It was apologizing for things that I started and didn't complete. After a few moments, that kind of faded away, and I went into this meditation that was just beautiful for me. I was still in the blackness, the tears had subsided, and I visualized a beam of light that I was walking on. And after a few moments, the beam of light was white, and after a few moments the beam of light went vertical and sparkled like when you look into a white crystal and see the fragments of light that kind of reflect light back. And that's what I was seeing, but I wasn't seeing it, I was it. And it was just going and going and going. And the moment that happened, I started crying again. And then I heard a twig break behind me. Someone was walking around in the dark, and evidently it came up behind me. And when I heard the twig break, it startled me right back. And the tears stopped, and I'm looking around in the darkness to see if someone's going to fall over me or what's going to happen. And I couldn't see anyone, I didn't hear anyone, and I couldn't get back into that. I tried to meditate and realize whatever this was again and make it happen, and couldn't. The next day was very similar in the walking around, not trying to get to one place or another, just being in the flow. And as I recall, nothing particularly eventful happened until that evening. After the conclusion of the final lecture in Merrill Hall, I started wandering the grounds again. And I had a bag of pretzels in my pocket, and I had my army fatigue jacket is what I was wearing, and the pocket was quite big. And I had just stepped out of the administration building, reached in and grabbed a pretzel. And as I was biting into the pretzel, I was thinking about some books that I had just finished reading. It was titled The Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East by Baird Spalding. And I thought for a moment that in that book they make reference to the Himalayan masters surviving for long periods of time on just a few grains of rice. And I thought about that and go, I wonder how they can do that, as I bit into this pretzel. Now, as my tongue pushed against the pretzel, against the roof of my mouth, I had this rush of, I'll call it energy, from the roof of my mouth going up the front of my face and down my back, and at the same time from my tongue going down the front of me. And I can feel it actually as it's traveling throughout my body and my arms and fingers to my toes. Well, while this is happening, right in front of me, like 3 feet away, I'm seeing a three-dimensional me with a grid system that has horizontal and perpendicular lines. The ones going this way are about 5 to 10 times the size of the ones going that way. And as I'm feeling this energy go through my body, I'm watching it light up in front of me. The grid system was gold, and as this energy I could feel going through my body, I'm watching it go through this three-dimensional me right in front of me, because it would light up as it's going through this hologram in front of me. The whole thing lasted a fraction of a second. I had the rest of the pretzel in my hand and I put it back in my pocket. And I'm going, whoa, what was that? I started walking around the grounds and going past the Crocker Hall again, and this is nighttime. I seen a raccoon in the distance, and I didn't have any desire to have the pretzels, and so I took the bag of pretzels and set it next to the trash can and thought, well, either it'll end up in the trash can or the raccoons are going to have a feast if they like pretzels. And I wandered around and ended up going back to my... I didn't quite go back to my room yet. On another occasion at Asilomar, I was in another building there, and I remember they had a fireplace in the foyer, and as I was walking around I came across that building, and I looked inside and the fire was going, but there was no one seated in the little living room set there. So I sat there a while and I put a few more logs in the fire by myself, and there was an easel there. And I was contemplating what had happened and didn't have any explanation for it. But I was thinking about the rest of the week, all these experiences that I had, and I was wondering, okay, if you were going to, because the easel was set up there and it had the markers and stuff, and I was wondering if you were going to share this with someone, how would you do that? And I sat there looking at the easel and watching a crackling fire, and I got up and went over and put a upside down pyramid with I at the first block and then AM at the next 2 blocks, and I blocked off the rest of it and then sat down and just contemplated that was how it could be communicated. But I didn't know anything beyond that, just that I am was the foundation for whatever you want to fill in for the rest of those blocks. And I sat there for maybe an hour or so. No one ever came in. I just sat there by myself, and I finally went back to the car and drove back to my room. The next day, I found myself in line at lunchtime, and I was contemplating that the bell's ringing and all these people are lining up to go eat, including me, but I wasn't hungry. And I thought how interesting that we're so programmed that we hear the bell, we get in line to eat even if we're not hungry. And I thought, well, I think I'll just get out of line and I'll eat when I'm hungry. Well, I didn't eat again that week. And I was home after a Silmar for more than 3 weeks before I ate again. And then I ate because I started to become afraid that nobody can go 3 weeks without even wanting food. And I was very careful during that time of not saying to myself, I'm not hungry, because I know that you can psych yourself out that you're not hungry. What I said was that I'll eat when I'm hungry, and I repeated that when I had thoughts about food. Even coming home the Saturday after the week of the Silmar had ended, I was invited to someone's home for a party and banquet of sorts. I don't remember what the occasion was, but they had a lot of food out, and I had just enough time to go home, change, and go to the event. And at this point it had been about 4 days since I had eaten, and I'm looking at all this food, and I didn't even pick up an olive. It was like I had just left Thanksgiving meal. I was stuffed. I didn't eat anything there. I didn't have bread. I had water, and at that point in my life I was drinking some beer. That's all I had during that time frame. When I started to become frightened, I opened up a can of soup that day, and then for many months after that I just had a bowl of soup, go to a restaurant and have a bowl of soup, and that's when I started drinking red wine. I never was a wine drinker until that day. Getting back to a Silmar, during the closing ceremonies on Saturday, they show a slide presentation of the keynote speakers and some of the activities and things, and they go through the slide presentation. And I'm watching it, and just a few slides into the presentation, and there's one of me, and I burst into tears again. I mean, why is someone photographing me? And after another 20 slides of different things, there's me again, and then there's me again, and they had me up there 5, 6 times. I don't know, because I was crying because I had never told anyone any of these experiences that I had. No one. I've only told a handful of people other than you right now, and I'm going, why are they photographing me up there? It's very humbling. On that Saturday after that slide presentation, and everyone's saying goodbye to everyone, they're heading home. It's now maybe 11 o'clock on Saturday morning, and your week of the Silmar is concluded. I was just wandering the grounds again, not trying to go anywhere, just thinking about all these incredible things that happened all week. And back in those days I was smoking. Just looking at the ground in front of me and smoking, and this gentleman walks up and he says, have you got a light? Of course I do, I'm smoking, you know, so I light a cigarette, and he says, quote, thanks, my life has sure changed since I got over my fear of public speaking, and walks away. And I stood there crying again, because what I was thinking as I was looking at the ground and he came walking up is that I have to get over my fear of public speaking so that I can learn to communicate what happened this week with people. And he immediately comes up and said, quote, "Thanks. My life has sure changed since I got over my fear of public speaking," and walked away. I never said a word to this guy other than, "Yep," when he said, "Have you got a light?" And that's what I mean about people starting to talk about whatever I was thinking. If I was around people and thinking about something specifically, it happened every time. But most of the week I was by myself. I was just wandering around. When I was leaving that Saturday, I had a friend in Salinas. Now again, at this point, although I was familiar with Monterey, I told you I used to live in Salinas, I was living in Camarillo. That's where I came back to. Well, I wanted to see a friend in Salinas before I drove back. So I went to his house, and that was a bit of amazement. Salinas doesn't have synchronized lights. They have the kind of lights that you can have 20 cars on the main street at rush hour, and there would be a secondary street with one car that can make a right-hand turn on red, but it'll trigger the light, and all the other cars have to stop, so this one car can make his right-hand turn on red. Anyway, well, the whole city is like that. Nothing's synchronized. Well, I got to my friend's house and made every light. And I go, whoa, that's never happened. All the time I lived in Salinas, you can't go from light to light without the light being red. Got to his house and knocking on the door, there was no answer, and I noticed his cat. And it paused and looked at me, and I said, "Don't be afraid." And the moment I said that to the cat just went wow, and just running out of the courtyard, crossed his front lawn and under a vehicle. And I realized what I had just said, not to be afraid. And when I said the word afraid, the cat ran. So I looked at the cat and I said, "I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you." And the cat just came right over by me and started cuddling up with me. And this was a cat that wasn't particularly friendly. I've been to this fellow's house many times, and it was his cat. If you tried to pet it, it would scratch at you and bite you gently. Well, this cat was just all over me, just loving up with me. And I realized for me how important it was for me to speak without using denials. That is ineffective for me to speak using denials. In my treatments, in my everyday life, occasionally I'll still slip when I immediately know it and go, wow, why didn't I say it in an affirmative way? That denials are not an effective way to communicate. I made every light again, going through Salinas, getting onto the freeway, all the way home till I got to the first stop sign coming off the freeway. The flow of what I was into lasted beyond the grounds of a Silomar, in that I went back to work the next week, and one day I answered the phone. Let me back up a bit. I was a produce buyer for a very large corporation, and that particular morning the broccoli market was very active. The day before, it was $4 a box at the close of business. That morning, it was already up to 6, going to 8. Before the morning was over with, it was a high of 11. And this is in just a matter of a few hours. The produce market can do that based on supply and demand. Oh, I notified all of my accounts that the broccoli market was very active, and I notified my largest account. Well, in produce, you do all your buying and negotiating first thing in the morning, and the rest of the day is your follow-up. Tying off loose ends, getting the trucks, going out and looking at product. Well, it was time for me to leave for the day to go out and look at product, and the phone rings, and I answered it, and an affirmative, the corporation I work for is Finest. And the person at the other end chuckled and said, "Well, you won't believe what I need." And before he could continue the sentence, I interrupted him and said, "It doesn't matter, whatever you want, you've got it." He said, "I need a load of broccoli." I said, "Oh, all right, when?" "Today." A load of broccoli is a semi-trailer. You know, it holds 980 cases of broccoli or so, sometimes 1,000 cases, depending upon the weight, 1,008. Well, your buying's already done for the day. The market at that point was already 8 going to 11. I hung the phone up and go, now I know I called him first phone call, and I no sooner thought that, and the phone rings. "Hello? It's a broccoli shipper." Yeah, I know the broccoli market's really active. I thought, you know, before I let go of this load, I would check with you and see if you need it. I said, "Well, when's it available?" "Today." "Oh, okay, well, how much?" Well, you do a lot of business with us. Market closed at 4 yesterday, you can have it at 4. I would have easily paid the $11 for it. So I got it for the 4. I never even made a phone call for it. He called me. So the flow of what I was into that week was still not just being on the Asilomar grounds. When I got home after that party that I went to on that Saturday, I went to Radio Shack and got a tape recorder and went home, and I did a 2.5 tapes or so while all this adrenaline was still in me of the experience that I had at Asilomar. Plus I call it the hymnal. Back in those days they gave you a long narrow book that had all the speakers for the week when they speak, all the workshops, and then in the back of it were the songs we sing. So I used to call it my hymnal, because you turn to that when we were in Merrill Hall, we'd all sing along the various songs. They would say, "Turn to number 13," or whatever the case. Well, because my Aunt Marn had told me to take notes, I took notes of all these experiences in that hymnal, if you will, and I still have it. And then I had the tapes, and that's what prompted me to do this book the first time. And again, that was about 5 years ago, I'm guessing. I'd have to look at when I printed it. I tried over the years, because this happened 25 years ago, to work on the material, and I would just start crying. I would turn a tape on, and I wouldn't get a minute into the tape and start crying. I would get out the notes that I had written in the hymnal, and I'd start reading, and I would remember one of the things that I wrote, and I would start crying again. I couldn't talk about it. It was just very emotional, and I thought about it all the time. No matter what I was doing, I'd be thinking about the experience at Asilomar, and I, like everyone else, lived a life with ups and downs, and raising kids, and teenagers, and oh my goodness, relationships, marriages. Had some experience at that, but all the time I had this in the back of my mind of what happened at Asilomar, and I had given the tapes to several people to transcribe for me, and I went through I don't know how many people to get it done, and there just seemed to be resistance. I couldn't do it myself because I just still kept crying. Even 5 years ago, when I finally sat down with someone to help me do the book, as I would look at it on the screen after I finally got someone to transcribe the tapes, and I'd want to clarify something, I'd read it, and it would bring me emotionally right back to when the experience happened, and I'd start crying all over again. So I never even read the book all the way through when I had it printed. The fellow who became my closest friend helped me produce the book the first time, and it's got a bunch of typos and some things in it that perhaps shouldn't be, and there were many things that I left out of the book that I'm in the process of putting in and redoing it. And the book will be on the internet for people to read in its entirety for free, and that'll be in, as soon as the lady who's helping it gets it done, hopefully a couple of weeks. And if before you leave, if you'll all leave me your contact information and your email address, I'll post you as to when it's available to read online. And if I'm forgetting anything, that'll be there too. I apologize if I'm leaving something out. It's not intentional. Do you recall anything?
What do you think was going on? You've had time to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought a lot about it. I thought about it that week when all these things were happening, and I thought about it countless times since, and it was the treatment that started the week off. And I encourage you, when you're doing your treatment work, if the emotion starts to rise up within you, to encourage it, because that emotion is what's capturing that wisdom for you. And I'll be happy to share it with you if you like, as best I can recall that treatment from 25 years ago. And I would invite you to join me. Beloved Father, all that you are, I am. All that the Source is, I am. All the qualities and attributes of the Source I possess. Joyous synchronicity fills all aspects of my life. I am, and I radiate Christ consciousness. I am happy and joyous always. With joy, with humility, I release these words, and know that as I've spoken it, so it is. And when I did the treatment that time, looking into the mirror, I had to stop many times, even looking at myself in the mirror when I would get the eye contact. I would burst into tears. It was so humbling, and I'll never forget it. So when I did the book the first time, my name isn't in it because I didn't want it to be about me, because anybody can have these experiences. I wrote in the book, I encourage people, if there's a void in their life of anything, to take the classes. Go to a seminar. The tools are there and they work.